Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Wealth of Nations. Today, we're going to be talking about the developing world and some of the things that I think is holding it back. Donald Trump's wall was big news since he first mentioned it in his run for president in 2016. He said of people from the southern border that they were bringing in drugs and bringing in crime. His message has found support by some people, but also has divided the nation. The Pope even condemned the idea of building walls, encouraging everyone to build bridges instead. Some people saw this as hypocrisy, considering that the Vatican has very high walls in some places. But that aside, it is a conversation that we are having at the moment, and it brings to mind many things that I think we should consider on the topic. Immigration was discussed by the classical liberals of old. Milton Friedman noted that historians today recognize that prior to the World War I, the U.S. had virtually open borders. It wasn't difficult to come to the United States. Even at Ellis Island, at the entry point for many immigrants, there was still requirements to be let in, however. People had to appear to be reasonably fit, they had to pass a simple IQ test in their own language, and have a few dollars in their pocket. If they met this criteria, they were allowed in. Those who failed were turned away. Fast forward a few years, and immigration law would get more restrictive. This coincided with numerous welfare programs that had been developed in the United States. Milton Friedman said on the topic, "Why is it that free immigration was a good thing before 1914, and free immigration is a bad thing today?" There's a sense in which that answer is right. There's a sense in which free immigration in the same sense as we had it before 1914 is not possible today. Why not? Because it is one thing to have free immigration to jobs, it is another thing to have free immigration to welfare, and you cannot have both. If you have a welfare state, if you have a state in which every resident is promised a certain minimum level of income or a minimum level of subsistence, regardless of whether he works or not, produces it or not, then it really is an impossible thing." Close quote. Times have changed in our world. Immigration was a benefit to the United States in 1914, but it becomes unsustainable when governments intervene and provide a distribution of wealth through welfare in the way many Western nations have done today. So what are we to do of all this? I don't necessarily think immigrants are coming to the West for the sake of acquiring welfare. I don't believe that is true. I think many of them want to work and make a better lives for themselves. They want to take advantage of the opportunities not afforded to them in their own countries. When I get an Uber, I am 90% of the time greeted by a friendly face from another country, and I'm almost always met with a pleasant greeting. We talk about life in Australia and life in our former countries. It saddens me to hear that on almost every occasion a lament is expressed of the problems from the home countries. A man recently expressed the problems in his native Kenya. He said corruption was so bad at almost every level. The police are corrupt, politicians are corrupt. He described the system of bribery that happens in society from police and to others. It is estimated the average Kenyan will pay 16 bribes per month. TripAdvisor shows exactly why this bribery is an issue and why it affects not only Kenyans, but the tourists that travel there as well. In a thread, it said, "Beware of Kenyan police." And through it, awful stories are shared of being harassed by police for bribes, for supposedly speeding violations where no violation was committed and where no sign of a policeman with a radar gun or the ability to test the speed of the drivers could be found. The quote that stands out in that thread is this, and it describes the ultimate repercussions of the wide-reaching problem of corruption. Quote, "These types of stories just point people like me to another destination." Close quote. So people with the opportunity to travel to Kenya reconsider it after they read stories on TripAdvisor. And that's a serious issue for the tourism industry and for Kenyans as a whole. The world is far too connected for such behavior to persist. The internet connects us to the stories and experiences of others. And if we find that we are likely to be harassed by Kenyan police, that disincentivizes people from traveling there, from doing business there. Kenyan police are hurting the economy through these systems of bribery, these short-term games that harm the country in the long run. My Uber driver friend also lamented at the feather bedding of politicians. They earn a very high wage compared to the average Kenyan, And when they get elected, the trend is to feather bed and support their own families to make sure that they are enriched as well. We have to consider what this does to the morale of a society. Those that are entrusted to lead the country to create a vision for society and act on it are turning to their own rather than to the people that elected them. It is a sad state of affairs and a major hindrance to the developing world. People from all over the world have access to the internet. They can see the way of life enjoyed in Western countries. They see jobs, the consumer lifestyle, the stable society, and rightly so they want it for themselves. I imagine many see it as an impossibility in their lifetime to achieve it in their home country, so many decide to depart and seek better opportunities in more developed nations. As these talented individuals leave their countries, in my estimation, it makes development far more difficult. NPR reported that in Kenya, there is only one doctor for every 10,000 people. Many healthcare professionals in Africa, Philippines, and India, upon completion of their training, travel to the United Kingdom, to the United States, and to Canada to find employment. And so continues the massive brain drain from developing nations to Western countries. Peter Natia, the Director of Curriculum Development and Training for Africa Medical Research Foundation, said this, quote, "It takes $150,000 to train a doctor here in Africa. That doctor leaves after an internship, and Africa has lost not just the $150,000, but everything that goes with it. A person should be able to do their studies and go and work anywhere in the world. That is what globalization probably is all about. But by doing so, the weaker get weaker and the stronger get stronger." Close quote. When I look at the situation from this perspective, I begin to be sympathetic to the view that there should be some restrictions in relation to immigration. I consider how it would be for developing nations if the talent was encouraged to stay and be utilized there. I wonder how rapid advancement would be for these people. It is something to consider as we consider the benefits and costs of globalization and immigration. On a related note, I find it interesting to explore the experiment that is happening in China. Many universities across the Western world are attended by Chinese students, affectionately known as sea turtles. For a time, only 1 in 10 were returning to China to work. That number has increased to 9 in 10. Another report showed that 94% of students returning to China were able to find work, which is very positive. I understand that China has experienced rapid growth and development in a short period of time, and people do go where the opportunities are. It is an example of an investment being made in the future for Chinese people through the Chinese students. And they are seeing a return on that investment, and I don't think we are seeing that to the same degree as other developing nations. It isn't possible for the West to absorb every person from the wide world. It's just not possible. I think it is increasingly important that, with that being the case, for countries to develop successfully and become winners in the game of globalization. Right now, I think the primary winners are Western countries, countries that are already developed. There should be an exchange of culture, trade, and development between nations, rather than a few here and there winning the hearts of the people. I look at Mexico, right on the doorstep of one of the biggest economies of the world. Due to corruption and other issues, it is not taking full advantage of that market in relation to trade and especially tourism. Potential is squandered by not playing the right game by the right rules. It is no different to the people expressing on TripAdvisor that they will choose alternatives if presented with negative evidence for tourism in Kenya, for example. If they find out that the police officers will harass them for bribes, they won't want to go there. They will find a place that is safer, a place that they can enjoy without being harassed and bribed by people there. And I imagine it is the same for many other developing nations. As I said, it is not possible for every person to migrate to better opportunities. So let's start a discussion here about the developing world and how it might develop a little faster. Let's have a discussion about raising the standard of all people throughout the world, not via revolution, but via persuasion to a better path. This is the vision of the classical liberals I've studied. It is by persuasion, not force or coercion, that their ideas have been shared and established. I see no reason why every country, if they have the desire to develop and prosper, I see no reason why they can't do it as well. What made the West great is just a selection of ideas of political, economic, and personal freedom. voluntary exchange between people, freedom of speech, freedom of ideas, freedom to express yourselves. These ideas can be had in the lives of any person, no matter where they live, no matter where they come from, no matter their background. I'm confident ideas are in the sight of all people. These ideas of freedom, these ideas of prosperity, and these ideas of fair and voluntary exchange. The more we talk about it, the more we engage in these ideas, perhaps we will take one step further, one step closer to that grand vision of seeing greater prosperity throughout the world. People will want to travel to these places, to work there, to study there, trade there, and live. And I see a future where places like Kenya, places like Mexico, will see Westerners wanting to travel there, to experience the culture, to experience the opportunities that are there, so we have a more free and more open society where the exchange is reciprocal. We have people going back and forth rather than many going into one Western nation, for example. If you believe in the great potential in all people, regardless of their background or location, then we are on the right track and we can make something happen here. If we start a discussion, I have no doubt that there is a lot of opportunities that could be capitalized on, and we can see greater prosperity throughout the world.